Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Impact Journeys. This is going to be an explainer on monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Every person working in the development sector is fundamentally looking to improve the lives of their beneficiaries. Now, this might be in terms of giving children education, it might be in terms of mitigating the effects of climate, it might be in terms of improving the health of a population. Whatever their goals are, there is an incredible amount of pressure that people put on themselves towards trying to get to that goal. And there is usually a function called monitoring and evaluation, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning increasingly, that is appearing as a department in organizations whose core job is to look at impact tracking, which is, are we moving closer to the goal that we set out to do? Today, in this explainer, we want to go deeper into what monitoring, evaluation, and learning is about and what it is not about. Joining me today is an old friend and a former colleague, Poorvaja Prakash, who has been working in MEL for the last 10 plus years and is someone who I look up to deeply in terms of this subject. So, Poorvaja, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Girish, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Poorvaja. I've been in this sector for about 12 years now. I have only worked in the development sector, so I've sort of built a career here. I started off with operations and programs and then found my love in research, and then I found my way and almost fell into the career of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And I'm excited to dive deeper with you today.
Lovely. So, what we have done for this episode is that we actually wrote to a group which had a set of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or MEL professionals, and we asked them for questions around what they would like to know and what they would like to understand. We have compiled those questions and we are using that as the base for what this explainer is going to be. This episode is going to be super interesting and useful for anyone who is working in the social sector in whatever role that you are in. And more broadly, I find it quite interesting even for people who are not in the sector, because monitoring, evaluation, and learning is something that's really close to strategy, something that a lot of you would be interested in. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Purvaja, starting with the most obvious question, but a critical one: what is monitoring and evaluation?
I'm so glad we are tackling the elephant in the room because no one explained it to me while I started working, and I'm sure it's something that you have found um, yourself in a rabbit hole for. Monitoring and evaluation are two processes that are involved in any sort of project management. Now, let's actually take a story to break this down a little bit more. Let's say that I have been running an organization. I have been working to improve literacy in a particular community, right? And let's say because we are in Karnataka, let's say we've been working in Karnataka.
Sure.
I started it, I decide that the way to impact literacy is by making sure that children have access to library books. Now, let's not get into whether this is an effective program. Let's just take this example. Now, I've been doing this. I've realized that there is a shortage. I am going now to different communities within this particular district. I'm distributing the books.
Right.
1 year later, I meet somebody who's working in another district and they are curious about what I'm doing. And then they ask me, okay, so you've distributed these books, but what has it resulted in? That is the point where many of us are like, but I can see it. They are reading the book. But what has it actually resulted in? Monitoring and evaluation are two processes that could have helped us answer this exact question. There are two ways in which somebody can understand whether their program is achieving the impact they want to have, whether they are making the progress that they wanted to towards this particular impact.
Right.
Monitoring is the first part of this component. It helps you assess the impact of something on an ongoing basis. Am I doing what I said I will do?
Right.
Is it reaching the audience? And is there some minimal change that's happening on the go? Evaluation is a process that happens at different points in time, and it almost helps you answer the question a little bit post facto, which is, having done this, is this resulting in the impact I wanted to have? So in this example, has literacy in these sets of communities actually improved? So this is what I would define as monitoring evaluation. It started off as project management tools, with private and public companies moved on to public policies because governments often have to monitor what they're doing.
Right.
And that now has kind of made its way to the social impact nonprofit world as well.
Understood. And what is this new terms that I'm hearing? I think we've evolved from M&E, or monitoring and evaluation, to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So what's going on there?
A great question. In my opinion, this learning component is why someone would want to work in monitoring and evaluation with a practitioner lens, right? Because if all I wanted to do is research and understand what's happening, somebody might choose to prefer to work with like a think tank, which is great, or with an academic wing.
Right.
But why do we do this within an organization? The word learning was added over there to emphasize the role that monitoring and evaluation is playing within the organization, which is to facilitate learning loops.
Okay.
Only if I learn from the data I am seeing, the insight I am creating, and not only do I just learn, I implement the learning in the second round of what I'm doing, or I make course corrections on the way. So the idea of adding the word learning is to instigate learning loops within the teams, but also for the sector, and create thought leadership within the sector. So that's where it comes from.
Understood. So it's basically monitoring what is going on, so that on an ongoing basis you have a sense of how many books have been distributed, are the children reading the books, etc. Evaluation is every quarter, every year, in some periodic frequency, making sure you look at all the work that's been done so far and seeing how far have we reached towards our goal. And learning is the ultimate point of doing all this, because from that learning, for your next cycle of work, you look at how do you improve and what do you change.
Exactly.
Perfect. And I think it's probably self-evident now why it matters, but why does it matter, if you want to share a little bit more on that?
I think it matters at multiple levels, and it matters depending on the audience and the role that you play in the sector. Right? So for an organization, let's say I am working in a leadership role, I want to make sure that the amount of time and energy I'm spending in a program is actually resulting in what I intended it to be. It's the best way to ensure efficiency and effectiveness in whatever it is that you are doing.
Right.
From a funder, donor perspective, there are many programs out there. How do I want to make decisions around which programs I would like to be associated with, not just from a personal ego boost, but also which programs are most effective, right? So from a decision making, like if I have to just zoom out a little bit, this is important because it helps you make decisions at different points in time. It helps you know whether the work you're doing is actually meaningful and purposeful. And ultimately, all of us are here because we want to contribute towards impact, and we want to see that impact happening. So this function plays a really critical role. And I would also, and I'm sure Girish, having worked with you, you would agree that this is not something that only people working in this function are involved in and interested in. So that's why it plays an important role.
Agree. And if we just want to make it a little bit real for everyone, can you tell us a few examples of what MEL might do in an organization?
I think that's a great question. I do think that it looks different for organizations in different stages of their growth and strategic career pathway, whatever you would like to, journey, perhaps is the better word. There are a few ways in which this can go. Let's say that I am someone who's starting out, right? I'm starting out with a new organization, a new program. I have something in my mind. I know the impact I want to have eventually, but I don't know how I want to get there.
Right.
So MEL can actually help you make those first baby steps there. So it'll actually help you define what you want to impact, and then think through, if I want to impact this, what do I actually need to know in terms of wanting to get there. That also helps you with other allied processes such as fundraising, such as getting people, communicating impact. So that's one very real way in which MEL can help you. The second is, let's say, organizations that have just started working out. Let's say you're working with an education nonprofit and you have a program around distributing library books, right? Something as simple as that. Where MEL is useful is that, say you've done 2 months of this. You are then realizing, you look at the data and you said, oh, I thought I was going to reach about 50% of the children in this particular district. I am reaching 20%.
Right.
What is going on over here? I can then use this as a base to investigate it. And I've heard of cases where, like the same library intervention, I know a case where someone actually decided to look at why this was happening, and then they realized, I'm providing the wrong books. I'm providing books in the wrong language here. People are not reading that, and that is why it's not going. So this is another example of where monitoring has helped you get somewhere. Now, let's say you are an organization that's been working for a longer period of time. You want to scale your program. You've been working in one district and now I want to take it to the entire state.
Right.
How do you do that confidently? Right? What is the contribution? And I'm very mindfully not using the word attribution, but what is the contribution your organization or your program has made towards those outcomes? Then you'll actually do a longer evaluation of this, where you evaluate your program at different points in time, and there you can actually make cases like, oh, the program is actually being very impactful for girls. We've seen better outcomes for girls than for boys. What does this mean for the new program when I scale it up and I take it to the state? Does this mean that the program simply focuses on girls? Do we actually zero in, or do we go broader? So these are different case studies where MEL has actually changed the course in which an organization can function, and for the better, because they've used it differently at different points in time.
And I think one of the things that I keep saying is, all of us in the development sector are doing this because we want to see some impact happen, right? We want to actually meaningfully improve lives. And every time, there have been many times when I have been up at night wondering whether any of the work that I'm doing is having any impact, especially when the moment you cross 10 people, you're hitting scale and it's hard to see that impact. And at those times, I have always found that going to MEL or going to impact tracking has been the way for me to get some hold of what is actually going on and seeing whether I am moving in the right direction. So
100%. And I also do want to say here that I think sometimes people who don't work in MEL can look at MEL as a little bit of an enemy, or a little bit of a function that causes more confusion than necessary.
Right.
And I think that there are adjustments that people across different functions need to make towards this. And by no means am I saying that a person who is implementing the program does not have a sense of what's going on. 100% their observations, their instincts, their experiences are all lived and they're equally valid. But we are all human beings and we all are subject to biases, which is where having a more rigorous MEL process can complement what you might already know. And actually can help you make better decisions, so that your biases, your cognitive or non-cognitive biases, don't get into the way of making your programs more impactful.
Agree. And if I were to look at someone who's in the programs, who's running the intervention or running the program, I would think it matters incredibly to them, because this is your eyes and ears. This is something that is supplementing your understanding and helps you to really know where you should be putting in your efforts, because very often we tend to be under-resourced sometimes, but definitely we will have more to do than is usually comfortable. And so how do you know what matters, what doesn't matter, and how do you cut out the noise and get to the signal of what's working in your interventions? So fully with you that it matters. I love that you said it matters depending on the org differently. And I also feel like it matters depending on which function you're in. And jumping the gun here, but since we're talking about program teams, is MEL all about data?
I am so glad you've asked this question. Data forms a large portion of what MEL does, but no, MEL is not all about data. In fact, there is a large component of MEL which is actually about program design, right? And it plays a role in ensuring that you are designing the program accordingly. And I'm sure we'll get into how and why. But the short answer to your question is no, it's not all about data. And another thing I would add here is data is also not just quantitative data.
Fair.
So there are multiple things that go into this function. Data is, of course, a strong part of it. Analysis is a big part of it. But there is so much more to this process. But this is one of the biggest myths.
Misconceptions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what are then the core functions and the core scope of what MEL teams are doing?
This is a great question because I think that it helps us really expand and zoom out in terms of what MEL could mean. You could think of MEL as actually a cycle of a set of processes, right? And I think that's the simplest, non-jargony kind of way to speak about this. MEL starts really with, and that's why it starts with program design, which is I start with defining intended impact. And this can happen again at the organization level, at the program level, at a very, very micro level. But let's say for simplicity's sake, we are looking at a new program, right?
Right.
I come in, I have a bunch of people, the MEL person is there, but also very importantly, the program teams are there.
Right.
You sit together and you define the impact you want to have. That is your long-term goal, your objective. Through that process, you also define the ways in which you want to achieve that impact. So this whole thing can be bucketed into one. What is the impact we want to have? How do we see ourselves achieving that impact?
Right.
Step one. Step two, what does that look like? And then how do I know it's happening? For example, if I let's stick to the same literacy example. If I decide that having impacting literacy is my goal, how do I know that this is actually happening? This is where you actually get into the nitty-gritties of defining the indicators or metrics. What do I actually want to track? Let's say I decide that for me, literacy is percentage of students because I'm working with students. Another thing, right? I'm defining the audience here. Percentage of students who are able to read grade level.
Right.
Right? Let's just take that as an example. Step 3. Now I know what I want to track. How? What are the methods? Right? Who do I want to actually track over here? Do I only track the people I am impacting? Do I want to track other people? So the methodology and the tools and the nuts and bolts become critical over here. How am I going to collect data?
Right.
How am I going to measure? So the measurement part of the whole equation comes over here. Then let's say program is ongoing. I decide when I want to collect data. You might want to collect data at different points in time, before, during, midpoint, after, different things.
Got it.
So this is like half of the cycle, right? Till now, all we have done, define impact, decided what it looks like, define metrics and understand how to track, defining where and how I'm going to actually collect the data.
Information. Right.
Going to the, if I can imagine like a flow chart over here, now I'm getting data on an ongoing basis. I decide to actually do some analysis with it. But do I just look and plug in data and get numbers? Probably not enough, right? So I do my data analysis and then I get into insight generation. I collect the data, I do some of my magic with it. I then bring a bunch of people together to make meaning.
Right.
So what? What does this all mean? This has multiple levels, right? So you might do meaning generation for your team. You might need to do meaning generation externally. Then you go into the learning loop part of the equation, which is I decide what I want to do with this insight I have gotten. I decide what I'm going to do going forward with the program. I also decide what I'm going to do in terms of communicating this externally. And I go back to my original. I decided this was going to be my impact. I had made some assumptions of this is how I'm getting to impact. Finally, I sit and do a postmortem of did I achieve the impact I wanted to have? And did it actually happen the way I or we envisioned it happening? So this is the entire MEL cycle. And these are the different components of what this could involve.
This is super clear, and I love that you actually started with defining intended impact, because very often when someone's fresh and new to MEL, what I hear is we need to do a sample survey. They directly just jump to the methods and forget around. It always has to begin with the why. Why are we doing the intervention that we're doing? And if I may, what would be the frameworks or the tools that you use at each of these stages?
I think there are two tools and frameworks that may be helpful for most people, and I'm sure everyone's heard of them. One is called a theory of change, and the other has different words, but logic model, logic framework, log framework, LFA, different words for it. The difference between the two is that the theory of change is a more high level version of the logic framework. The theory of change is meant to actually be messy. It is meant to show the organization and the team the different pathways in achieving the impact. And I'm sure you can find several examples of what that is meant to be.
Right.
Again, you start by defining the impact you want to have, and then you think, what are the different ways in which I will achieve this impact? Right? And you actually start making pathways within this. This is actually super important and very useful for people and organizations and programs at the early stages, because you can actually realize that there are many ways to achieve impact, right? It also helps the organization pick and choose which bets they want to take in achieving those impacts. So I define the impact, I think, through, if this is the impact I want to have. Again, if I want to impact literacy, what are the different ways in which I will achieve this impact? And I kind of note it down and I connect this. So theory of change, you will often find are lines and connections between different stages. And the best way to think about it is, if X happens, then Y can happen, Z can happen, A can happen, B can happen, C can happen. If one of those things happen, what does that result in? It's also the classic case of backwards planning.
Right.
If I ultimately want to have Z, what are the different things I need to actually do to get over there? So you actually form these different connections, and you'll find that there are multiple connections and multiple pathways. A theory of change is also helpful because it helps you actually name assumptions, right? So let's say, again, I want to impact children's literacy. What are some of the assumptions I'm making over here? I might make the assumption that for children to be literate, the immediate teachers in the surrounding may need to have certain amount of skills. Parents may need to know how to make this. So those are things that I can actually sit and say, okay, this is the assumption that I'm working on. Like, this is what I'm basing my intervention on.
And you make it as realistic as possible, I would assume.
Yes. I mean, there are different paths to this. One vision is to make it a blue sky thinking. And I think that's helpful, especially when you are starting out. Right? When you're very fresh and your organization is new, it helps to have a blue sky thinking version. But ultimately, you do want to narrow down. The purpose of this exercise is also to help you make choices along the way and say, if this is the program we intend to have, do we actually see this happening? So if I actually have a full map in front, which are the pathways I want to choose? So this is what a theory of change is. And it's actually, it comes from the name, right? Like, what is the change I want to have and what is the theory behind that?
Understood. And I often used to see it in my head as, first you have the theory laid out, here are the connections. Then as you're actually doing the intervention, things are happening or not happening and the reality hits. And our monitoring and evaluation is essentially, I see it as probes put in during the period to see where we are and to get us, their sensors in your program to see where things are. That's how I usually look at it. So shall we go through each of the parts of the cycle and like go a little deeper into the questions that were asked? What does the M&E framework for an organization look like and how does that fit in? The next step was to then define your, essentially your M&E framework, right? So what would that entail? Is it, like someone asked, is it just creating an Excel sheet? Should we be replacing the name MEL with monitoring, evaluation and reporting?